All right, good evening. It is 6:02 p.m. and I will call the Provo City Planning Commission hearing to order for September 25th, 2019. This evening's agenda has 3 items on it, all related. The items that are marked with an asterisk are items that must be approved by municipal council, so the Planning Commission will make recommendations on those items. The items without an asterisk are items that the Planning Commission can approve or disapprove. We'll begin the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Ms. Urquiaga.
Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioners. Could we start with Ms. Urquiaga to state each Commissioner's name and whether they have a conflict of interest this evening?
I'm Laurie Urquiaga, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflict.
Dave Anderson, no conflict.
Deborah Jensen, no conflicts.
Russell Phillips, no conflicts.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflicts.
Maria Winden, no conflict.
Thank you, Commissioners. Okay, in the interest of keeping us on track this evening, we will be limiting neighborhood chairs to 5 minutes during our public hearing portion, and members of the community 3 minutes at the podium. And that is so that we give everybody the opportunity to be able to get up and speak. All right, so I will turn this over. Well, actually, I'll read in the 3 items first, and then staff will present. So item 1, Dudley and Associates requests a general plan amendment from residential R to commercial C to accommodate an office building located at approximately 1009 West 2000 North in the Residential Conservation RC Zone in the Carterville neighborhood. Item 2, Dudley and Associates request a zone change from Residential Conservation RC to General Commercial CG for property located at approximately 1009 West 2000 North in the Carterville neighborhood. And item 3, Dudley and Associates requests concept plan approval for an office building in a proposed general commercial CG zone located at approximately 1009 West 2000 North in the Carterville neighborhood. And Mr. Wright will present all 3 of these. And just as a side note, the Planning Commission and Community Development received many emails and letters as late as today. We've been provided with all of those and have had an opportunity to review them. And Mr. Pepperoni with city staff will actually make a summary of the key issues he finds at that after Mr. Wright's presentation.
Thank you. So the property in question tonight is located here on State Street, just south of 2000 North. The property is currently on our general plan map as a residential designation. So anytime there's a rezone, we look at the general plan map to see what the recommendation is there for the designated use. So with the general plan having a residential use there, this would have to be amended as part of the rezone request that would be needed for the project to be built. To the south of the property, you see that general plan designation is commercial, and so that's the designation that they're requesting to have the property change from residential to commercial as far as the general plan goes. The other map we see here is our zoning map. The current zone for the property is residential conservation zone, which allows for existing uses that were established when that zone was put in place. To the south of that is the general commercial zone, in pink there. So this is the zone that the applicant is requesting to change the property to, from residential conservation to general commercial. So the general commercial zone allows for the proposed use that the applicant is requesting for a medical office to be built. And so we'll take a look here at a close-up of the property. Currently, there's a single-family home on the property, and it's a large lot that has frontage on State Street and then access to 2000 North. The applicant has brought forth a concept plan if the property is changed to the general commercial zone to build this development here along State Street, and then to have the remainder of the parcel be for the parking for that development for the medical office. If you notice, the property to the south was built a few years back by the same developer, and so as part of their parcel there, you can see that the proposal here is going to have an access point through the parking lot. The intent there is to provide access to this property. Currently along the frontage on State Street, there's a very steep drop there on the property, and so access would be difficult there. The portion I think has brought some concern to the neighborhood is the access point on 2000 North. If you can see right here, there's going to be a gate that would be placed there so that it's for emergency access to the parcel, but not for patrons of the property to utilize to go into the neighborhood. The access is going to be through, or would be through, this portion. So these parking stalls would be removed, and this would become a drive access into the parking lot there. And so that would be the main in and out for the property. And so with a lot of concerns that we've received from the neighborhood, we've reviewed those. We've provided you with those comments that we've received from email to review, and if we can outline what some of those are at this time. And then if you have any additional questions about the project, we'd be happy to answer those.
Great, thank you, Mr. Pepperoni.
For those residents who sent in email or letters to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting, thank you very much for taking the time to do that. It's helpful for the Planning Commission that you get that information before the actual meeting. But the issues that were raised in the correspondence that has been received so far include these concerns. Quality of life, that this is kind of an isolated, quiet residential area, and that a three-story office building would have significant or substantial impact on the residential area. That the RC zoning that has been put into place to replace the R2 zoning that was there has been positive for the neighborhood because it has encouraged people to invest in their properties. That there's a desire for a neighborhood plan. That there are other alternatives for this property that would be preferable to the neighborhood. That 2000 North is a very narrow street with no sidewalks, and the impact of traffic from this project for construction and for everyday vehicles would be too much for 2000 North. That property values would be negatively impacted. That the city does not adequately value this neighborhood. That Provo already has empty office buildings. How will the office building be used? What type of medical tenants are intended to go in there? Will there be a tree barrier or other types of buffers between this project and the residential housing? Will the parking lot lights be shielded in some way? There was an email sent in that was titled 5 Myths of the Property. One is that no one will buy the property unless it is rezoned. Another was that property will be an eyesore if it is not rezoned. Another is that property owners will be, that the property owner will not be accommodating to the neighborhood concerns. If you don't allow the medical building, you may get something worse. The last one was that this is not spot zoning. That a zone change from commercial to commercial would encourage even more commercial encroachment into the area in the future. And that, again, there are other uses that are more compatible and more preferable to the neighborhood than an office building. So those were concerns raised in the emails that have been given to you so far. Now, there were some given to the Planning Commission just before the Planning Commission meeting started, and I haven't had time to go through those.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions for staff at this time? No questions? All right. I will invite the applicant then, with Dudley and Associates, to present this project.
Thank you for taking your time to conduct this meeting. I'm Roger Dudley. I'm the engineer for the project. I'm not the developer. The Savages are here, and they are the developers. They own and operate the Grandview Medical Center that's there now. Very successful business. Dr. Savage and his family are personally involved in the day-to-day operation of that facility and want to expand their successful business to this property that's been offered to them by the Anderson family. I could speak to, I suppose, the question before the Planning Commission tonight is basically a land use question. Some of the technical things can be worked out in the site plan process as we continue forward. But basically, it's a land use issue as to whether this is an appropriate use for that property. We've held neighborhood meeting, and that was well attended, and had the opportunity to listen to the neighborhood, and they expressed their concerns, and so we've gone through that process. The property, of course, is vacant now except for the one residence. The plan is to completely fence the project, similar to what the fencing is now. That would more than likely be a concrete panel fence that would surround the site. The access to the north, which has been of a concern to the neighborhood, will be closed, and either a knock locks for the fire department or some method for, it's only for emergency vehicles. The fire department, in reviewing that, felt a need for another access into the property because of the building and the necessity of having secondary access. So that will be closed off. There will be no traffic entering into the neighbor. Maybe a fire truck if something catches on fire. So that would be the only time it would be used. We feel that it's an appropriate use. The property now is vacant. I'm not sure. Access is going to be a little bit difficult to develop it as residential. If you notice along 2000 North, that's homes where the existing access would have to be widened. If it were to be developed as a standard subdivision, then there would most likely have to be the removal of homes in order to do that. So we feel that it's a good use for the property, that it's important that it's a good thing for the neighborhood, for the city, for land use, and obviously for the Savages who want to expand their business. The lighting question that was asked about, of course, lighting can be directional. That's a simple engineering idea that the lighting would all shine away from the residences. There's ways of doing that to protect them from the lighting question that was given. We're proposing a fairly wide landscaping strip around the perimeter of the site. If you notice, we've made some effort to widen that so that the amount of landscaping that's put there could be helpful in softening the parking lot from those who live next to it. We would be happy to address any questions. Dr. Savage and her husband are here, Dre Savage, who manages the Grandview Medical. They're here and would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the particular plans for the building, and I'd be happy to answer any engineering questions that you might have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Dudley? Mr. Phillips?
No, I don't.
Ms. Urquiaga?
It might be for the Savages, but I'm curious as to what kind of landscaping they're talking about putting between the parking lot and the residences.
That hasn't been decided. We would obviously want that to be somewhat screening in nature. There would be trees and shrubs, and those would be landscaped and sprinkled. I would anticipate we'd want some fairly large trees around the perimeter. We haven't addressed that in terms of specifics. Our landscape architect would address that appropriately. They may have some comment, but okay. Yeah. We're happy to suggestions. The staff would be very helpful in that, I think. Yeah.
The buffering requirements of the zoning ordinance would require a solid barrier wall along the border, and with 10 feet in those areas, you could plant something that would grow pretty tall.
What type of medical facility will this be?
I'm going to let the Savage answer that
Would it
question.
be something that would be used at night? Or would it be strictly daytime?
I'm not sure.
So the type, we're family
Please
medicine.
state your name for the record.
I'm sorry, Dre Savage. We're family medicine is our clinic. We can see a need for more specialty. We've talked about family counseling. We've talked about specialists coming into that building that kind of works with family medicine. And so it would just be where, patients would be able to, instead of going to an IC or then they could still go to Utah Valley, but we would have patients there they would also go to that building also to see a physician there for specialty care and that for the most part. I want to just note also on the, I guess it would be the east-south side, there would be a retaining wall that would bring the ground up a little bit, so you have a retaining wall. The ground would probably be about 3 feet, and then with a solid cement fence, 6 to 7 feet on that side, all the way around to where it goes into that a little exit to 2000 North, and that, so there would be a retaining wall there. Does that answer your questions on the type of? Oh, and it's business hours, it's clinic hours, which is usually it's 8 to 5, could go 8 to 6, but usually it's about 8 to 5, about just normal business hours.
Ms. Winden?
I have 2 questions. How many offices are you proposing in the building?
So it'll be 3 stories. There'll probably be, and it all depends on the use of space and that. So there's 3 levels, and depending on, if a specialist just needs 1 office, then there would be multi. If it was, we would have it built so that 2 to 4 business, or 2 to 4 clinics, I should say, or 1 to 4 is probably better on each floor, depending on the type of clinic they are.
Thank you. And my second question is, what is your occupancy rate for the building to the south currently?
So when you say occupancy rate, we have approximately Oh, as in occupancy, not patient occupancy, it's as in.
Office.
Oh, it's completely full. We've got 2 other clinics and a laboratory that's in our building currently right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any,
I have one question. Changing land use designation from the general plan is a fairly serious undertaking, especially in an existing neighborhood. Do you have a compelling reason for changing the land use of this site as opposed to building your facility elsewhere?
just that it is close in proximity to our family medicine clinic. That would be the reason, is to have an additional building there to bring in just additional medical specialists and medical clinics.
So to expand your offering to,
Yeah.
for medical services?
Exactly. Mhm. Yeah.
Mr. Anderson?
What are the minimum requirements by way of improvements that need to be made between this kind of use and like a neighboring residential use?
What type of,
Wall, fence, landscaping?
okay, yeah, so they would be required to put in that, that landscaped buffer area that surrounds or borders the residential area, the 10-foot landscaped area. Then they'd also have to put up a buffered 6-foot wall along that adjacent property line to residential.
Okay. Where it looks like on kind of the northwest corner, maybe the building's closer. Maybe there's 10 feet there, but maybe it's not like consistent landscaping. Is there a concern with that, or?
Yeah, so in that corner there, it would the building would have to be 10 feet back, and there'd have to be a landscaped there. So again, with the concept plan, any of those technical issues, we'd have to make sure they're all ironed out with the project plan that they'd have to submit if the rezone got approved.
Relative to the landscaping, are there requirements, like certain number of trees, minimum spacing,
I believe
maximum spacing?
it calls for a landscaped buffer area. Not aware that it requires a specific amount of trees to be provided there. So, and again, I don't know that it sounds like the applicant hasn't gotten to that point in their landscape plans to show what they're proposing there. But if there's a recommendation that the Planning Commission might feel comfortable with, that would be appropriate to express what that would be, and then hear how the applicant would respond to something like that. If there's a specific frequency of trees or something that would help, then that should be expressed so that you could see if that would be something that they were planning on in their plans.
The landscape requirements are in section 1520 of the code, and you have seen some industrial projects come through that have had very specific ratios required. Let me look through this and see what it is. I believe there are specific numbers for frequency of trees and that type of thing based on linear footage. So let me look that up, but I think there are some requirements there.
Okay. Zoning and building height. So if the zone change were granted, any setback to building height ratio, anything like that comes into play?
Yeah, so the setback requirement is 10 feet for the building. The building that they're proposing is 3 stories. The CG zone doesn't have a height limit for building height there. And we can double check on the transitional standard requirement if there's any additional buffering based off of height in that.
There is, and that's in 1434-300, and it says there's the ratio of setback to building height, but it says building setback in such areas shall be at least 1 foot for every 2 feet of building height. Buildings over 20 feet shall have a setback of at least 10 feet. So they meet that.
How does the at least come into play? And maybe I'm struggling with the concept, just generally speaking. I'm really struggling with a 3-story building 10 feet from a property line and a single-family home maybe 20 feet from that same property line. and with just what might happen along that boundary in terms of things like tree spacing. So I'm particularly worried that should the zone change get approved, then we look at a project plan, and as long as the applicant meets the bare minimum, it gets approved. So that's, and for me, those are some of the bigger issues that I guess just worry me about the concept of general plan change, zone change, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have a few questions, and these will also pertain to engineering. What is the gross square footage of your proposed building?
I'm sorry,
I'd like to know the gross square footage of your proposed building and the size of each floor plate, approximately.
I don't have that information. About 18,000 square feet, roughly.
In 3 stories?
6,000 per floor, yeah.
And I'm also interested to understand how the grade changes are working on this site. I've been to the medical office building, so I'm familiar with its pretty difficult entry off of State Street as it is.
Right.
And then there's a retaining wall at the back of that parking lot. What's the difference in grade between where you would, where the existing parking lot is and where the proposed parking lot would be? And what kind of slope would you be dealing with?
There would be some drop there. We would more than likely fill the site a little bit to make that drop. There would be a drop between the two properties. If you've been there, you could see that along State Street, there's about a 30-foot retaining wall there. So from the State Street side, you would see a portion of the top story, and that would be the visual from State Street because the property is at a lower level. There'd be a retaining wall between the two properties, and then, yes, the driveway would drop probably about 4 feet, 4, maybe 5 at the most.
And what kind of length are you allowing for that drop?
That'd be about 40 feet, roughly 40 to
So that's a pretty steep drop down.
Yeah, we would have to get to the lower level. That's true, yes.
And could you tell me a little bit about how you would propose phasing construction? Obviously, if you have a drop like that, you can't bring in large construction equipment over an existing parking lot that's being used by an active business off of a difficult entry off of State Street. So could you just talk about how you're proposing to stage site construction and building construction?
Well, of course, the natural thing would be to bring construction through the access on 2000 North, because that is, in other words, to haul material in, to haul building materials in and out, that would be preferable. I don't know that we would absolutely have to do that. The materials could come in through the medical access on State Street if that was a requirement. I could see that happening, sure.
I would say we'd try to take everything through the medical. We can go around that other building that's in the back, but we would maybe use that, the north end to access for that, allowing the south end to access the medical building. I would do everything I can. Yes, are we gonna, one thing that we'd mentioned, we're gonna take our water, and this is something that Provo City requested, that we take our water and loop it. As we connect it to that building, we'll loop it back into the neighborhood to increase the water into that neighborhood.
Are you talking about water pressure?
Water pressure, I'm talking about, water coming from, so looping that water back into the neighborhood there, and that, which would increase the pressure in the neighborhood, and that. Would there need to be some construction to put the water there to connect the sewer? Yes, but we would do everything, I think, I would try to do everything I can, and talking to the contractor, he would say, he thinks that they can do everything they can to take it in from our parking lot, allowing our parking lot to be open to our patients, but also allowing the construction to go in there. And that we have a lot of parking in the back of this building that we could do a lot of the contractors could do, and I'm talking about the east building. That's kind of it's more of just a storage building there, and we could park a lot there and park and getting people into the that area in there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just seriously doubt whether you can adequately utilize the drive entry off of State Street for heavy construction equipment. You're going to have mass graders, concrete trucks, you name it, material supplies, building supplies delivered.
I think whatever is built on this site, you will experience construction equipment coming and going. If it were to be developed as a single-family subdivision,
At a different level,
at
yes.
a different level, but again, construction equipment would have to use 2000 North for all of their access if it were to be developed from 2000 North. In other words, again, the question is, we looked at this, if it were to be developed as a standard subdivision, there would have to be at least one home be removed in order to get appropriate width on the access. So the dilemma with the piece of property is that it's really limited to its access. I think that's partially the reason it hasn't developed.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Ms. Ellsworth?
I have a question about the lot lines. It looks like this road, kind of this northern access road.
Use this and point to it.
Yeah, thank you. This right here appears to come outside of their parcel. Does the owner own this? The applicant own this home, or how are they navigating that corner?
I'll have my designer answer that. I'm not sure I know the answer.
There is a little triangular piece of property that sits right there that the owner of the bigger property does not own. It was purchased many years ago in a tax sale, and we don't own it. We are in negotiations with him, but are holding off until we hear the outcome of tonight. The owner of the big piece actually owns this piece as well, and we've talked to him. If we cannot acquire that triangle, we have to still maintain an 18-foot swath through there for fire apparatus, and he would have to grant an easement across that area right there for that fire apparatus access.
Thank you. What's the distance between that right-of-way or that easement and that structure? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioners, any other questions? Mr. Knudsen?
You answered part of it when they talked about the access from the existing parking lot to the new parking lot. How many parking spaces are going to be provided?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think we were right at the required amount using a gross leasable area of the building. We actually downsized the building and kept massaging the square footage of that building until our parking met that requirement. So I think we're right at the required number.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Winton?
This is a question more for staff. If this were kept at a single-family residential neighborhood, would a residence need to be torn down in order to maintain an access road there?
It would be, maybe I should defer to engineering, but it would depend on the trip generation of what goes on this property. Once it hits that threshold, it would have to be widened. Is the threshold 500 trips a day, 250 trips a day, David? Do you know?
250, but it would still have to have a minimum width for a 24-foot asphalt road plus sidewalks. Might be 40 feet.
So it's likely, yes, that if this, may I see the pointer, please? If this developed residentially, that this would have to be widened to the point where I think a house would have to come down.
Thank you.
Even if we could get somehow other property owners to want to be involved and get another road out, I think you have to have two ways in and out once you develop this residentially, and I think that would have to be widened enough that that narrow neck is not going to be adequate.
Commissioners, any other questions? I have one more for engineering, and it concerns the grades that we were talking between the existing parking lot
Okay.
and what your new parking lot would be at. And he mentioned it could be as much as 5 feet difference in grade and over 40 feet.
It's actually over 50. Those parking stalls are 20 feet deep. That's a 10-foot planter and another 20 feet on the other side. So it's about a 10% grade. Now, that seems like a lot, but I'm 5'10", and so you're dropping this much in 50 feet. So that's nothing. There's streets in
It's
this.
actually quite steep. It's quite steep to walk up, or
Well,
if
there's
someone's
city,
in a wheelchair. Or
there's streets in the city that are 15, 18%. There are driveways
On mountains.
going into 12 plexes off of University Avenue that are 18%, right off of University Avenue down into an underground parking structure. It's not ideal, I agree, but it's all we have to work with.
Does that exceed any city standards?
I think our city grade is 12%. Is that correct, David?
For long runs or for short runs?
Maximum period.
But typically, even 12%, that's not for like an unlimited distance, right? Or is it?
12% would be a local road.
No maximum length on a 12?
15% on driveway.
Really? Wow.
Wow, that's quite
No
steep.
maximum length, I don't believe.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Ms. Wyndon?
Actually, just one. In one of the emails, there was a question raised about water pressure, and I just wanted to know if that was an accurate potential problem.
So the question, David, is this feasible to be developed residentially off the water system without a loop?
It's not ideal, but I think it would supply enough water. It would depend on the density. You know, we'd probably have to eliminate a few units to be able to still supply the right amount of water. But I think you could go residential, or the benefit, I guess, of this commercial site is he's able to loop the water line through, and that's a much better water solution. That's one solution that comes from that. So the water pressure in the area would go up. The water quality would also increase because you have the cycling of the water through the loop. So does that answer your question?
So if it were to remain residential, approximately how many homes would be sustainable on that property with current water pressure?
I don't think like I've ever looked at that to see how many homes would fit, and it would depend on the density. You know, if it was something more than single family, we would probably hit a limit where we couldn't go anymore. But I don't know what that would be. I don't have that figure with me, so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Day?
I might add one thing. We're always asked about traffic. You know, that always comes up. So this site would be zero traffic onto 2000 North. A residential connection would have to go out to 2000 because there wouldn't be the access through the medical site. So any trips would use 2000, so you get about 13 trips per unit. So you can see how that could go up. You know, you had 10 units, 130 vehicles on that road. So just one thing to think about. So,
Ms. Urquiaga?
I do have a question. If it were to be residential, it would require 2 access points?
that would depend on fire and the number of units. I doubt you'd get enough units in there in that piece to require 2 accesses, but if you did, then
Okay.
it would be required. Our threshold is 250 vehicle trips require 2 accesses, and that's about 22 units. So,
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Day? Or the applicant? All right, thank you. All right, at this time, I will open up this portion of the hearing to public comment, and we'll begin with the neighborhood chair for the Carterville neighborhood. We're going to limit neighborhood chairs to 5 minutes discussion and general residents to 3 minutes, and we'll have a timer posted, and we'd appreciate your compliance with that. So if the neighborhood chair is present for Carterville, and please state your name for the record as you come up to the podium.
Hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm the neighborhood chair, and I proudly represent my hardworking neighbors. We had about 50 to come to the neighborhood meeting, and 33 were opposed, 7 in favor. We don't necessarily agree on all the parts of the project, but what we do agree as a neighborhood is that something needs to change. Currently, I want to show you, there's a natural buffer between the 2 properties, and I want to show you this little diagram. So this is if you're standing in a yard looking west, this would be State Street as it goes up the hill. This would be the current Grandview office building, and this would be a house. This natural buffer, which is their masonry wall and the actual grade of the land, is between. At our house, it's about 15 feet high all the way to State Street. As I mentioned, it's 30 feet high. So if they are to build they say that their 3-story office building would look like this. I just think it's important that you see visually what it's doing to the neighborhood. A house rebuilt in the same spot even a 2-story house would barely peek over the top of their lot. So this is a natural buffer that occurs between residential and commercial that we think should be maintained. We seriously doubt that the 2000 North will not be used for traffic because that steep driveway, as you mentioned. We also have had a problem continuously for years of questionable traffic coming through the property, the Grandview property, into the backyard through an unlocked gate and access point on his line. We've asked him multiple times to clear that to protect us from that, and he refuses to lock that gate. So we don't have a lot of confidence that he will not let that to continue to happen. We have serious light pollution concerns right now. Grandview parking lot shines brightly into our backyards. We've asked for the lights to be turned down. Thank you for finally turning them down, but years. Can you imagine how this will be with the 3-story office building and their lights directly on top of the neighbors? The street has experienced significant investment, rebuilding, and improvement over the last few years, despite the current owner of the lot, his neglect of his property. A towering office building and parking lot will discourage owner-occupied investment, which has historically, we are owner-occupied, encouraged awesome landlords to also remodel their properties to attract the high-quality renters that are an important part of our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is a fantastic place to live, and we don't want to lose that improvement momentum. This property has actually never been on the open market for sale and has not had the opportunity to sell at fair market value for residential use. The parcel easily fits 4 houses on a shared lane, and that is permitted by code. You can ask more questions about the driveway, but 4 houses on quarter-acre lots, which would be a lot like what's surrounding it, without having to widen the drive. And I just so you know, that house right there has a later addition to it that can be taken down to widen the driveway for even a larger complex without harming the structure of the original home. So no homes would have to be destroyed. I understand that the city would like to see more tax revenue. And while I think it's a terrible idea to base city planning on neighborhoods on how much tax it will pull, I would like to point out that as a medical office space, this will pull no tax revenue, and it will, and based on other commercial properties, the tax revenue will be about $18,000 a year. As homes, it will be about $12,000. So I don't think that difference is really worth carving up a neighborhood. This is a very bad example, or good example of spot zoning. It goes against several items in the code that I've detailed in our neighborhood report. This is singling out a small parcel of land for use classification, commercial, totally different from the residential use of the surrounding area for the benefit of one party. This does not benefit anyone except the owners of Grandview Family Medicine and the seller. It does not enhance the walkability, view, redevelopment, or beautification, or any other desirable outcome for the neighborhood surrounding it. The city has zoning and general plan areas to designate how areas should develop and grow, and since 2002, this area has been restricted from even homeowners who want to add density or replace old structures because of the RC zone. To allow a rezone citing a desperate redevelopment need of the area when the city has caused this burden is completely unfair. This street and the surrounding area needs a fresh new zoning that will allow the entire neighborhood to redevelop and thrive. We especially think that it's not fair to reward the seller of this lot for years and years of neglect of his property. Thank you. Well, sorry, we as a neighborhood, last sentence, we as a neighborhood, we do want to work closely with the city to develop a neighborhood plan and redevelop this area.
Thank you, Ms. Sarah. Are there any other neighborhood chairs present?
Here, underline Glide Giles.
Sorry, neighborhood chairs.
I am a neighbor, Rex Giles.
No, neighborhood chairs, we have one more chair to
Oh, you
speak.
got one more
Thank
chair?
you so much.
My name is Andrew Lowell Richardson. I am a vice chair of the Carterville neighborhood. I would like to read in a late letter that we received that did not get passed on to the Planning Commission on behalf of Matthew and Jen Smith from our neighborhood. We have lived on 2000 North for over 5 years, and we are highly in favor of rezoning this parcel for the use of Grandview Family Medicine's project. We believe that this project would increase light and security on our street, clean up a very undesirable parcel in the neighborhood, create local business opportunities, decrease unwanted pedestrian traffic on the street. Please consider approving the rezoning request associated with this project. We strongly support it. Best, Matt Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
I actually, for the neighborhood chairs, and this is an information question, don't draw anything from it, but is there anything that they could do that would make it acceptable for you?
The problem with this is that we can't hold an owner, once he owns the property, we can't hold him legally to anything he says to us. So based on the geographical problems with this lot and how easily it is to do a residential use which will match, we're not really confident in taking anybody's forward. Beautiful, yeah, there's nothing, we love the Grandview Family Medicine as a practice, but as a developer, we don't want to leave open-ended promises.
May I ask a question? Sarah?
Mr.
may I ask you a
Pepperoni.
question? So you're more knowledgeable than most neighbor chairs, I would say, and most residents in land development and those issues. You talked about 4 homes off of the driveway, and I agree with you that that's something that's very feasible. But on the 1.2 acres, how many homes do you think is feasible?
Reading the code, it looks like 4 with a shared lane is possible, which means that nothing has to be done to the lane right now for 4 homes. For a 5th home, then they would need to widen that road and take out that part of that house. But they're owned by the same owner.
But you wouldn't get 4 homes on 1.2 acres, probably, would you? Or is that what you're
Yeah,
suggesting?
4 homes on 1.2 acres is really generous. That's over a quarter acre lot per home.
Okay.
That's a lot bigger than some of these lots.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Sarah?
Follow up on that. I don't want to misunderstand. With your question, do you think more homes than 4 might be realistic to expect?
I have no idea what yes, I thought that anyone who went after this would do a pocket neighborhood and probably have something more like 8. Well below, that would still keep it well below a threshold that would necessitate another access out. But just based on property values in Provo, I question whether or not 4 is financially feasible. Do you think 4 is financially feasible?
Based on the lot prices right now, a quarter acre lot is going for about $200,000 right now in Provo, so that's It's a pretty big deal.
$200,000 lot, that means you're going to get an $800,000 home. Are you going to get $800,000 homes down in that area?
No, to sell the lots. So I think that you would be able to sell these lots for less than the market rate. I mean, I'm not the owner.
Well, I see what you're
So,
saying. Okay, I
Yeah,
misunderstood.
there's plenty of value in selling these as parcels.
I'd be shocked if we saw a proposal for this property, residential development proposal, with 4 lots. You know, for better or for worse, we seem to see more aggressive proposals than that. And really, the biggest question that I have about the proposal is, if not this or something,
Right.
you know, maybe like this use, maybe even in a different kind of configuration, then what? And how realistic would it be, in your view? How would a proposal for, you know, maybe lots that are smaller than a quarter of an acre, maybe 6, maybe 8, something
Yeah.
like that, how would that be received by the neighborhood, particularly with the idea then that I think the connection to the neighborhood would be on 2000, or the connection to the development, maybe the only one would be on 2000 North. Any thoughts about that?
There was a project that came through, it went to CRCs for 4 single homes, and it financially made sense, but the engineering was saying that there was a problem with the water pressure to create a fire hydrant. And so the culinary water is okay. The water for a fire hydrant is what hung up that project. And so all we would need is an agreement between the city and a potential developer. I'm talking about that low density. So if you want to go 4 houses, the only thing stopping that would be an agreement from the city for a sprinklered house instead of a fire hydrant. If you wanted to go higher density, we would need to go back to the neighborhood and ask what they would see, I would say would be too dense. I border this property. To me, a towering apartment building wouldn't be feasible just because of the size of the 2000 North.
No, nothing attached,
Sorry?
not an attached housing project.
Apartments wouldn't go in there. It's too dense for this road, but 4, 5, 6, 7 homes, I'll leave it up to the developer, but it can be done.
How would you feel about that? I guess that's really what,
I would
yeah,
love more neighbors, personally. I would love to live next to more neighbors.
even if they were single-family detached homes on maybe 6,000 square foot lots or 5,000.
Sure,
square
some of these lots are probably around 6,000 square feet.
Okay.
Yep. We have a very diverse neighborhood.
Mr. Knudsen?
In driving through there today, I noticed there's quite a few duplexes. What would your feeling be about if someone developed with duplexes?
This is part of the thing we want to come back as a neighborhood to develop our neighborhood plan like the Joaquin and Tim neighborhoods have done. And I've counseled with the neighborhood chairs of those neighborhoods and how they built their plan. This is something that we are excited to bring the entire neighborhood in and say, how do we see this developing?
Any other questions for Ms. Sarah? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to address items 1, 2, or 3?
Okay. Good. Yeah, I used to work for Cubco. I
Sir,
know-
please state your name for the record.
Wayne Clay Giles. I used to work for Cubco. I know you cannot get a big truck going down that neighborhood. I pulled the 3-axle trailer. 3-axle, 30-foot trailer with a 28-foot pop and a 270 wheelbase. I lived in that neighborhood. My grandpa owned that property for 50 years, Roy Giles. And we know how the water is on that too, because every time we irrigate, we flood out the neighbors' houses. So when the water table goes up. So if he's gonna put this building he wants, that's another thing. My wife works at Home Choice, and they got the same buildings these people go to. There's a dairy farm there, and they throw their drugs and their needles and their meth over in his property, and they contaminate his property. It's alfalfa hay. What's going to happen when you put a wall over there and they throw drugs and needles and meth over that on their property? They're going to contaminate their property. Little kid's going to get a needle in their leg or foot. We don't need it in the neighborhood. He could take it and put it on the commercial property. We don't need it. Now, if you guys want to build houses on it and apartments, I'm for that. And he's sitting there telling me he's going to bring water back. That's just going to flood the neighbor's house out. We know all about that water. We lived there for 50 years. So, I appreciate it. So, he thinks he's gonna run big trucks around that neighborhood. That ain't no way in heck, because them trucks brings, they got 53-foot trailers. And you're looking at 260, 270, 280 wheelbases. You're gonna have a heck of a time turning them trucks around in that neighborhood. And that fire truck, he's gonna have a heck of a time to go through that little small area too. I know, I drove my son by in that neighborhood. I know how it is. It's hard. So, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Giles. Are there any other members who would like to address the items at hand? Please state your name for the record.
My name is Wendy Acey. I live at 962 West, 2000 North, which is directly across the street from the proposed development. I believe that everyone here can agree that the current situation on the proposed development site is untenable. The property has been severely neglected by the current owner, who has allowed huge unsightly piles of trash dirt to be dumped there and overgrown weeds to create a fire hazard. There are also rusted-out vehicles strewn about the property. The home on the property is severely run down and apparently has become a magnet for illegal drug activity. But while we are very concerned for the safety of our neighborhood, the Dudley & Associates proposal is not the solution. It is the wrong development, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The Dudley proposal massively impacts our family. We live directly across the street from the property, and 2 of our children and their families live in homes whose backyards adjoin the property. In 2001, we purchased and renovated our home. We chose to make a large investment in the neighborhood. It appeared to be a neighborhood that had fallen on hard times but was poised to make a comeback. We had hoped that the property in question would be developed with attractive single-family homes, which would act as a catalyst for other homeowners on our street to improve or renovate their properties, enhancing the quality of life for all the neighborhood. The Dudley & Associates project would virtually eliminate that potential and create an environment where fewer property owners will want to occupy and upgrade their homes on our street. Finally, as one who will be directly affected by the project, I would like to make a plea to the Planning Commission and City Council. While we welcome all views and opinions associated with this project, we ask that you give the highest consideration to the views and opinions of homeowners most directly affected by the proposed project, those whose property is adjacent to the project, those who have a direct view onto the property, and those living on the west end of 2000 North who will be affected by the project's potential light pollution. We are the ones that will have to live with the results of your decision concerning the property in question as we work to create long-term improvement plans for the Carterville neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Acey.
My name is Devin Acey. I live at 962 West, 2000 North. I want to state that my wife and I and my family who live adjacent to the proposed site are opposed to a commercial development in our residential neighborhood. We are frustrated that property owners on 2000 North have not had the opportunity to consider other, more appropriate projects for this site. We know that there's been at least one serious proposal to purchase the property and build affordable single-family homes there. The potential buyers were under contract to purchase the property, then went to Provo City, as Sarah has mentioned, to present the plans, only to be told that water mains were not adequate to support a new fire hydrant. Without the resources to pay for that upgrade, the buyers were forced to withdraw their offer. We have heard, on the other hand, repeatedly that Provo City wants to preserve the character of residential neighborhoods and make it possible to build affordable homes in these neighborhoods. Why, then, in this case, were obstacles thrown up that essentially torpedoed this neighborhood appropriate project? It seems to us that if the city is serious about helping property owners in the neighborhoods develop long-term plans to preserve and improve the neighborhoods, that city administrators would look for ways to facilitate residential development projects instead of making them more difficult. Is there really no way to find funding for utility upgrades that could smooth the way for desirable development in residential areas? Are there other workable solutions that would make long-term planning for residential development possible? The current situation with the neglected property attracting a potential crime and presenting an eyesore is unsustainable, but it is not fair to property owners on the street to be held hostage by one neglectful property owner and what we feel is an inappropriate commercial development that presents itself as the solution to these problems. While it might provide some relief from the deteriorating property on the other side of our fences, we believe that it will negatively impact property values and quality of life on 2000 North. We believe that there are other projects that could resolve the problems while still preserving the residential character of the street. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Acey.
My name is Gina Dorada. I live on 2000 North. I only heard about this today, so forgive me for being a little bit more candid and not having a formal statement like the other people have spoken. I wanted to say this is a lovely, quiet residential street. It is a fantastic place to live. If we were to have a huge building towering over the other homes in the neighborhood, increasing the light pollution, increasing noise, increasing traffic, despite what has been said about potentially limiting the access to emergency vehicles only, it sounds like at the very least during the construction process, which I haven't heard anyone define the length of that, there would be a great deal of traffic through that space. And as was pointed out by our neighborhood chair, we have no way to hold new developers to their word when they say that it would not be used. It sounds like there has been a history as well of not necessarily caring for keeping gates locked. This would destroy the lovely atmosphere of this area. There are other options here. There are many other ways to make this work, so I just ask that you consider other options for this space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Beeler. I've lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. I live on 2150, which is about 2 streets north. So my life would not be impacted positively or negatively much by this. But I think I'm in favor of a more residential development as opposed to turning it into a parking lot and a medical facility, mostly because I think it's more fair to my neighbors who have purchased houses and live there under the assumption this is zoned residential and is not going to be turned into a parking lot or immediately adjacent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beeler.
Just want to, do I need to state my name again, Dre Savage?
If-
Can I make a comment?
Let's wait till everyone has
Yes,
spoken, then we'll have you come
once
back up.
everyone's spoken, then we'll invite you back up to address any comments.
My name is Bill Hennon. I live on 2150, about a 2.5 blocks from where this is happening. I moved into this area 3 years ago, and I have put in over $100,000 into upgrades into my home. With this, I would have never moved here. This is not something that's attracting anybody to this neighborhood, and will have a degrading of that whole area, which will then creep over into where I am. This is not the proper thing to put in this neighborhood. It is not going to generate any kind of goodwill in the surrounding area, and I think the comments were relative to what happens when you have a fence and you have needles and meth and everything falling over that fence. No one would want to live in that area, and you're going to see a complete degradation of everything around that area instead of an upgrade. You have an opportunity to put an upgrade. You need to put the investment, the utility investment should be a investment by the city, not by the neighborhood. Those are services that are supposed to be generated by us as a city, not by putting that burden on the individuals who are trying to put homes in that area. This is a completely unworkable plan.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Doreen J. I live on Carterville Road between 2000 and 2100. I hadn't planned on any kind of a talk or anything today, but the house that you're referring to that's near that roadway, I believe that is owned by the Andersons, and I think that they used to own several more of those houses that are along 2000. And I'm a little bit concerned at the fact that if they own more property, that they may want to sell that additional property for some other use by Grandview Family Clinic. So I'm a little bit hesitant about the fact that they own so much of that property in that surrounding street. The other thing, so I may be wrong, I don't know who owns it other than that, but I remember from past years they did own other areas. And almost every one of those houses from that house down a couple more are all in very bad, neglected state. Also, the other thing is, a Grandview Family Clinic was just built a few years ago. It sounds to me like they're very short-sighted if they thought that they needed to have expand. They came from across the street, from across State Street, when they were in the those bungalows over there, those white bungalows. I forget what that area is called. Seems to me that they could move across the street, and it would be still a local place for them, and they could use those facilities there. They could even tear a few bungalows down and build something bigger if they needed to. If there were something developed more, if you look at that map, there is so much area behind many of those homes. I don't know what the neighbors who own it now, but there's a very strong possibility that we could have some beautiful homes built on 2000. The value of my house 5 years ago was only about $200,000. Today, it's worth over $300,000. Our neighborhood is growing. Many of these people took bungalows. The Aces took a bungalow, and they built a beautiful home that I'm sure is worth well over $400,000 right now. And the same with several other homes in our neighborhood that they are developing. Please, listen to your voters. And I would like to ask one question. When the truck went over the cliff and landed in the yard of where that house is, have you put a barrier up so that they won't drive out of the upper Grandview area into that yard?
And the applicant can address that after the public hearing
Okay.
sections.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Sherry Solberg, and I'm one of the vice neighborhood chairs in the Carterville neighborhood. I'm a homeowner that has lived on 2000 North for over the past 40 years now. And we bought this property to develop it when the zoning was R2, when you could do duplexes. As our small home sits on one of the 7 1/2 acre lots on 2000 North. When zoning was changed to residential conservation, we were happy to focus on cleaning up the neighborhood. I've been helping with Neighborhood Watch, and single-family homeowner development. This has paid off. As we have cleaned up the neighborhood, many young couples have found this area an attractive place to live and have bought homes and fixed them up in our area, making it a much nicer place to live. I hear quite often that this is the best kept secret in Provo, and I've got to say that I totally agree with that. We've worked hard to maintain the quiet, neighborly feel in the Carterville area, and any zoning change from residential conservation to commercial would radically change the dynamics of this area. and could also set a precedence, as what Doreen was saying, to continue to open up our neighborhood for further commercial zoning. This would be devastating to our pocket of a tight-knit community. I strongly oppose any changes from residential to commercial zoning in our area. However, after talking with Gary McGinnis on long-term planning, we would like to see thorough long-term planning considered by the city to explore long-term options to help revitalize and protect the Carterville neighborhood. I have often heard that Provo City wants to protect and preserve our neighborhoods, and have seen Provo get involved in neighborhoods plans like in Temp, Joaquin areas with amazing results that allow families and individuals to thrive in a close-knit environment. There are many alternative options for this property that are compatible with the fabric of the neighborhood that would fit in with and allow for other new positive growth and development on 2000 North that would enhance the Carterville area, helping us work together to envision the best possibilities for our neighborhood's future, where people and families have the opportunity to thrive. I'm asking for any zoning changes to be vetoed, and for the Carterville residents to be given an equal voice and an opportunity to work with long-term planning and have all of our other options heard and looked at. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Silberg.
My name is Shanae Ivans, and I live just off of 2150 North. It's a couple of blocks away from this. And from where my house is, I can see the other medical building already. And it's even further away from the neighborhood. You get one that's closer, and it will impact the entire neighborhood. In looking at the plan, my father was a contractor. He built medical buildings. And so I understand where they're coming from of wanting to do this. But a 3-story building, your trees would have to be so big to cover up the lighting from that building that I don't think it's possible. And the northeast corner, sitting close enough to that property line, I do not know how you would do a green belt along there. This is the first time I've seen the plans, and I get both sides, but I do not feel that this is a good idea for this neighborhood. Because the light issue, the construction, I think of all those beautiful little children that live on that street that have no sidewalks to stay away from the construction that would have to come down that street, and that street is not very big. I don't know how they would be able to do that. And I see where they're coming from, but I do not think that this is feasible for this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ivan.
Hello, my name is Joel Acey, and I live at 937 West, 2000 North, right next to the lot being considered for rezoning. I want to discuss the 5 myths that have been generated regarding the property that's being considered for rezoning. So myth number 1, no one will buy the property unless it's rezoned. So I've lived in Carterville for 17 years, and this property has never once been on the market. A 1-acre property is impossible to find in the middle of Provo City, and for the right price, buyers will come scrambling to make an offer. Myth number 2, the property will be an eyesore if it's not rezoned. On the contrary, a commercial replacement would be the eyesore, featuring an ugly heat-trapping parking lot with street lights that would create an eyesore at night. The 10-foot fence would be unnatural and overbearing and would potentially hurt our land value. Who would want to buy a house that's right next to a parking lot unless it's truly a bargain? Myth number 3, the owner of the Grandview Medical will accommodate our concerns. So we and my neighbors have called the owner multiple times, expressing concerns about the lights and random strangers walking through our private backyards to his property. The only change that we've seen, or finally saw, was the turning off of the business sign at 10:30 p.m., but that was not really the problem in the first place. So how can we trust that he will respond better after putting another commercial building 10 feet away from us? Myth number 4, if we don't allow these medical offices to be built, we would see a worse development. The Carterville neighborhood used to have a reputation of being the worst area ridden with crime and drug houses. But we have come a long way, and we've seen owners, including myself, personally invest in the area by moving there and remodeling our homes. Building 4 to 5 houses on the lot would significantly facilitate long-term plans for the neighborhood. Myth number 5, this is not a spot zoning. One of the first things you notice about the current property line is that land drop-off that creates a natural barrier dividing the residential and commercial areas. So the rezoning will create a feeling of invasion from the commercial zone. So I urge you and invite you to come and see for yourselves. It'll make sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Laurel Lowe. I live on the property, the very east property bordering the proposed addition. I don't have anything new to say that you haven't already heard, but I purchased that home and I've put a lot of money into renovating it and updating it and creating a more beautiful space. And I've been raising my children there, and I am strongly opposed to the new addition proposal. My backyard is very small, and I really don't want a parking lot backing up against my tiny backyard. And I'm just hoping to have my voice heard, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lowe.
My name is Kay Jingris, and I've lived on 2000 North for 43 years, and I appreciate the small, close-knit community that we have become. I've seen people come and people go, and I'm really happy when people come and buy and stay. It's really adds to the community and the feeling of associations that we have. I am opposed to this development. I think it would really affect the character of our neighborhood, the value of our properties, and it would certainly be an imposition on those property owners who live right next to and would back up to that addition. And I really feel like there are probably a lot of other places that this development could be placed, and it would be an asset to that community, but I don't think it's in the Carterville area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Ron Dean, 2207 North 800 West, about 5 blocks away from the property in question here. Members of the Planning Commission, I'd like to express my gratitude first to you for being willing to serve in this capacity, and I know sometimes it's unpleasant. Grateful for your service. My family and I actually have medical care in the Grandview Family Practice Building. We appreciate the medical professionals that are there and the work that they do on behalf of my family. I'm grateful for the opportunity to comment on the proposal by Dudley and Associates requesting a general plan amendment from residential to commercial in a residential conservation zone. I appreciate both your willingness to serve Provo City and your willingness to consider the thoughts and feelings of all involved in this proposal. I've been a homeowner and resident of the Carterville neighborhood since 1994. I've noticed with some concern the deterioration of the property in question. As you may know, it's currently in a state of disrepair and neglect. It's an eyesore to our neighborhood. A redevelopment of some kind is in order. I believe, however, that the current proposal is a bad fit. This 1.2 acre parcel abuts State Street on the west, residential properties on the north and east, and a commercial property on the south. The residential properties on the east are 2 half-acre parcels on the east side of the proposed development. Are 2 half-acre parcels that could theoretically be rezoned and redeveloped, further intruding on the residential character of the neighborhood, especially for those who live along the west end of 2000 North in the Carterville neighborhood. The fact that the property in question sits in a residential neighborhood already, that affordable housing shortages are becoming critical in Provo and the rest of Utah County, it seems that residential, for which it is already zoned, would be ideal. In a report from the Housing and Community Development Division of the state of Utah, Provo has an affordable housing deficit of over 9,000 units, and Orem has a deficit of almost 5,000 as of October of last year. I suspect it hasn't improved over the last year. On just the website LoopNet today, before we came to this meeting, I found over 300,000 square feet of office space for lease in just Provo and an additional 650,000 square feet of office space for lease in Orem. Given the residential nature of the ground at the west end of 2000 North in the Carterville neighborhood, the uncertainty of further commercial intrusion into the neighborhood in the future, the paucity of affordable housing in Provo, and the apparent abundance of office space in Provo and Orem, I would request that the Planning Commission not recommend a change in zoning status for the property. I would recommend that Provo City require the current owner to clean the property up under the Provo Municipal Code Section 143480. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment?
I do. My name's Doug Solberg, and if I don't get up here, my wife said she wouldn't feed me tonight, so I want to admit first that I'm not the smartest guy on the block, and so I don't understand the reason for this development, this commercial development. I don't see how it's going to help me or any of my neighbors. It seems like it's just going to change everything on that street. The street sort of has like somebody said, there's no sidewalks. It still has kind of a country feel to it. And most of us are pretty simple people. And, we don't ask for a lot, and we just like to keep it the way it is. My wife and I took our family up to Whidbey Island in the state of Washington, lived there for a while. And up there, it's a pretty progressive place to live. And they started doing developments. I don't know the exact term of the development, but it was a cottage residential zone where they would take, they would put 11 or 12 small cottage houses, single-family homes on a half-acre lot. And it was arranged in such a way that it was almost like a park in the center with the homes around the edge of it. And they were beautiful little developments. And I've noticed around Provo that there are, I don't know what you call it here, maybe a pocket neighborhood or something like that. Aesthetically, they're not as advanced, but I think the idea of that is great to, get people interacting with each other in a small area, and especially in a single-family setting. Originally, when we bought our property a long time ago, we had the intention of building duplexes, making a quick buck, and then getting out of there. And we've been there about 40 years. And we soon learned that the people that lived around us were pretty nice people, and we couldn't do that to them, to build apartments and then leave them with the mess. So I would like to see this area given some real foresight, and we're all smart people, we can do things, we put our heads together. the people that owned that property originally would be rolling over in their graves now, seeing what's happened to the homes that they built. And I just hope that you'll consider, looking out for the residents in that area and taking care of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg.
Thank you for allowing me to come up here for a few minutes. My husband is here with me.
Would you state your name for the record,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry. Yes, my name is Lorraine Augustus. And my husband and I have lived in our house on 2000 North since 1983. The house belonged to my husband's mother, and she lived right next door. And it's like Brother Solberg said, it has always been this quiet country feeling because there aren't sidewalks, curb and gutter and all that. They tried to put that in, but I'm not sure what happened with that. But it's just, I think it is zoned I can't remember what it's called. It's zoned as a country road or something rather than as a Provo City street. And we raised our children there. Our oldest two boys were 5 and 3 when we moved there, and then we got, our daughter was born after that. So our kids grew up on this street, in this neighborhood. And now, when we go out on our front lawn, there is this great big medical building that we can see over the top of our one neighbor's house. And to put another big building in there, I just can't visualize what this is going to do to the neighborhood. Another concern that I have, I don't recall hearing this brought up. If it has been, I'm sorry. But I'm concerned about it being, any of the property being zoned as commercial, because it's all zoned as residential right now. And so if somebody says, well, that's just this one parcel. Well, then what happens when somebody else comes in and wants to build some other thing, and they're saying, well, there's already this one place on that street that's zoned commercial, so why can't ours be zoned commercial? Why can't we put a business in there? Why can't we have a convenience store or some other kind of commercial building? We live right across the street from Wendy and Devin Acey, and they have both come up here and talked with you. We live right across the street from them. They're just on the west of us. And Sarah and Joel Acey live right across the street from us. And they're wonderful neighbors, and they have done an awful lot to fix up their homes and their yards. And people have really made this a nice area to live in. And I'm just very concerned about what the consequences of this would be. I don't know what the bearing this would have on this neighborhood.
Thank you, Mrs. Augustus.
My name is Jonathan Anderson. I live on 2000 North. In fact, my wife and I, our home is first home just off the picture here, so we're rather close. And for us, we have concerns kind of in both directions here, in that when we moved into the home, which was 2 years ago, we bought our home 2 years ago. And so we've heard a lot, I guess, about what the potential impact on property value could be. And this is something we looked at because for us, our biggest holdup moving in was this lot and the things that are at the end of 2000 North. There's no question in our mind that with this current build, or the proposed build, I guess, that would have actually increased our odds of buying that home. However, with a big caveat here, we also very much support the idea that if homes were built on that property, that would be even better. I think a lot of the neighbors, us included, feel almost held hostage by the current situation, in that the lot is in, again, very ill repair. We hate the way that kind of makes the neighborhood feel. But I've also come to the understanding anyway of what I learned in the prior meeting, was that the current owner seems to be refusing to sell, selling at a absurdly high price, a price that might be too large for any sort of residential development. So for us, we don't have necessarily an opinion on whether or not we agree or support or oppose this build. I just think there's a lot of things that should be considered and you guys should think about. With the change, I guess, that would be happening here, our neighborhood already backs against Grandview, so that's not a huge change. It is a change for the homes that are directly adjacent to it. The light pollution is a significant issue, even in our home that's a little bit further away. Our bedroom definitely lights up at night and glows a little bit due to the current light pollution, so that's a big concern for us. But if there was some way I could be guaranteed that new residential homes could go into this property, then I would 100% oppose this current proposal. I just don't know if that's feasible. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know what can be done. But take it for what it is. That's, I guess, a new owner, new home into the residence. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Hello, Charlie Anderson. I'm the one that owns the property. To me, this would be a very good improvement on the property and the neighborhood. As far as, crime, the lights they're complaining about, it would hold down crime because it's all lit up. The lighting does not affect, them anymore because they can spotlight everything down. The lights have changed a lot. It would just clean the whole property lines up. It wouldn't really make any changes to what they already have. It would just be a lot nicer looking. I mean, everything would be aesthetically pleasing as far as the eye can see. I mean, it's just one of those things that people, I understand that they don't want to have any changes and, development, but we can only get one home in there with that lane coming down there. You can't get any more than, you can't get 4 houses in there. We've already looked into it. It's only 15 feet wide. So to me, this is going to be the best thing for the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any other public comments at this time? Kind of last chance before we close it to the public hearing portion. All right, seeing none, then we will close this portion of the hearing to public comment. And I would invite the applicant to address any concerns he heard during the public comment period.
I state my name again. I'm on that. My name is Dre Savage, owner of Grandview Family Medicine, a medical clinic. I appreciate the comments that have been made tonight and to hear some of the comments. I just want to, there's some misunderstanding I want to clarify about my business being on State Street and building on commercial zoning there is the access to my building is a gate, or the access to my property from the Carterville property is a gate. It's for a public utility easement that Provo City requested or required that I put that in, and they required me to put a gate in there, and I could not lock that gate. They said that it needs to be accessible to the utility company at any time. And so I did not put a lock on there. It has been damaged 3 or 4 times, and I've had to put it back up because it has been knocked down, and so I've repaired it and put it there. Recently, I heard from a neighbor saying, well, your lights, the light, not necessarily your parking lot lights, but your lights coming from your building, your signage that you have on that east side is shining. And I said, let me take care of that. I brought in an electrician and I had them put a timer on it so it shuts down at 10 o'clock or 10 p.m. That was the only time I'd heard that the lights were being a problem from the neighbors, and it was from a neighbor that had just let me know that there was a lighting issue with that. The lights are a security issue. They do light up that area because of the traffic. There is a lot of people that walk from the neighborhood through that lot and then back into onto my property to go over to State Street, the gas station that's neighboring to the south of my building, and then so that's why there is a gate there, and I think that with this project it would ratify and take care of the problem of the vagrancy and those people that are walking through with a gate on the end, not allowing people to walk through there at all, which I would like to see that too, and so that's it. I just wanted to clarify that. I'm not sure if there's anything else that I need to share. I think that was it. I just want to make those clarifications on that property. I do want to just say that the building is up by State Street. It is State Street property facing, State Street facing, and not necessarily into the neighborhood. And then it is part of that, the State Street roadway, and that, which is commercial.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions?
Actually, no, not for you. I have a question for staff.
Okay, okay.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, staff, did you want to address any of the concerns mentioned? Anything further to add?
Just if you have any specific questions, we'll answer those.
Great. Ms. Urquiaga.
My question has to do with the upkeep of the property now. What is the remedy, or what's supposed to happen to resolve that? Obviously, that doesn't meet code.
So you're talking about current like zoning violations on the property?
Enforcement.
Yeah, enforcement issues could be brought to the city, and zoning enforcement could go out there and investigate, and if there's concerns that they're not meeting city ordinances, then they'd be able to enforce upon those to get those brought into compliance.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, I'll turn it over to the commissioners for discussion. And if you want to take it items individually or discuss it as a whole first, I'm open to either. I'll start by just saying that I don't find the proposed developer's reason for a change in the general plan to be compelling enough. Yes, economic development is very important to the city. It helps support our tax base. But this is, I think, it's not, I think there's an existing neighborhood here. It's been in place for quite a long time. They're unfortunately next to an arterial. But with the grade change, they're kind of isolated from that arterial. They're, 30 feet below. And I feel like there's not a compelling reason offered to support a change in the general plan in terms of land use. So if anyone else has any comments on land use. Ms. Winden?
I am sensitive to both goals in the general plan. However, my thoughts are that housing is at a premium and Provo needs invested long-term residents. And it sounds like this neighborhood has, over the years, increased owner-occupied housing. Sounds like the rentals have improved. And I believe homeowners have a reasonable expectation that their neighborhood will remain the same or close to the same when they move in. In my opinion, I believe other projects would better enhance this property rather than commercial. Having said all that, I would like to just caution the neighbors that any development of this property will put increased traffic on 2000 North. And I've heard many of you say that you like 2000 North just the way it is. But I don't see how that will be able to continue, no matter if it's houses on there or what goes on there. But I do not believe that changing the general plan from residential to commercial is appropriate at this time.
Mr. Phillips?
No, I also agree that the residents should understand, as we've been told, as many as 200 more automobiles on 200, which is, as I visited it, such a narrow street and hard to get there. But I too agree that we should have some expectation of what our neighborhood should be, and it sounds like, as a neighborhood group, that we're hoping it could be developed into a residential type area.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Anderson?
I won't restate everything that's been said by my colleagues here. I agree with it. And maybe this is, for me, more just comments that I have kind of relative to some of our expectations for developments like this. I think inherently that a medical office building in a residential neighborhood does not need to dramatically change the residential nature of the neighborhood. However, with a proposal like this, where you have a 3-story building as close as you do to single-family homes or other types of dwellings, like this plan proposes, you don't argue with the fire department, but I'm not at all enamored with the idea that there needs to be an emergency access even to connect to 2000 North the way that this does. So for me, it's more a matter of just this particular design's lack of compatibility with the neighborhood. But I really appreciate what we heard from the neighborhood relative to the idea that they'd be comfortable with this property being used residentially. My guess is that by the time somebody solves what would be an access issue for the property, that's probably going to be fairly expensive. So like I said earlier, I would anticipate that development proposal is maybe going to be a little bit more aggressive than, lots even that might match the size of what is in the neighborhood today. And who knows how that gets received. But that all being said, to make a project like this potentially more compatible with neighboring land uses, I'd love to talk about different standards that we might have in terms of building height to setback in that ratio, whether it's a commercial use or residential use or anything like that. If there's a requirement for a certain number of trees in a project, where does some of those trees at least have to go? Is there maybe a minimum requirement for trees along a property line between different distinct types of uses, whether it's commercial to some kind of residential, or maybe multifamily to some kind of lower density residential, just whatever that might be. I think we have opportunities maybe to make these projects impact neighbors less and to change neighborhoods less. And that's a discussion totally distinct from this one, but particularly our chair here and her comments just relative to, I think it's really hard to see how a general plan amendment is justified here. That's spot on for me.
Yeah. Ms. Ellsworth?
I agree with what's been said. this project brings to mind two different projects that we've grappled with recently. One being the office building that's next to Timpview High and the adjacent townhomes that were proposed there. I'm not afraid of mixed use, but and this is different, obviously. There's some more proximity to commercial, but it does create some really awkward spaces. And then I'm also thinking about the Pleasant View neighborhood, and I just wonder if, how this space or how this parcel would receive a multifamily that's like that. It may not be feasible. It may not pencil or work at all. But I think there's something that's more compatible that could occur here that would be more in line with our general plan.
Any other comments? Yeah, I would agree that medical office. Mr. Knudsen? I was just going to add that medical office, three-story medical office adjacent to one-story single family is not a very sensitive transition. And I agree with Mr. Anderson's comments about the regulations we currently have that don't really address some of those issues that could make for much better infill development over time. And I would also like to see that addressed in our codes in future as we move forward. Mr. Knudsen?
Maybe the neighborhood chair could kind of help me with this. Back in time, how long has this other facility been there? The other facility, the building that's there now, currently, the medical center?
Oh, how long their center?
How long has it been there?
3 years.
3 years? Could you kind of, what was the feeling at that time in your neighborhood about this development? Because it would have been completely residential at the time, except for, I guess, the service station on the corner.
Yeah, there was a derelict service station, car dealership, car lot. It was in rough shape. It was being used, yeah, it was in rough shape. So we didn't have anything opposed to the medical center by itself, although we did have this beautiful natural skyline of trees that, yes, they're weed trees, but when they get 40 feet tall and they're all in a row, it completely shielded. We didn't even know that car dealership was there. So we woke up on Christmas Eve one year to those being actually torn down, and we were pretty surprised. So, I mean, we also did not have an acting neighborhood chair at the time, and so our voices weren't heard. I think at that time, I live on the property. At that time, I wouldn't have had a problem with the remodel and the Grandview being put there. But I am upset that after the fact, that gate that allows all the vagrant traffic to come through is right in my backyard, and that the city required the developer, in his defense, he's absolutely right. The city required him to leave a gate for utility access. And had I been invited to that meeting, I would have said, great, but do you understand we already have a very bad traffic problem, and we need to perhaps enclose that utility box so that we don't leave ourselves open to that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Knudsen, the property where the medical building is now was already zoned general commercial, so it didn't go through any of these types of hearings. They just went through project plan approval.
Good to know. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Motion on the general plan amendment? Mr. Anderson?
Separate motions, how does the commission feel
Yes.
about acting on all three now?
We need to read them in separately.
Okay,
for the
but do you
record.
mind if I just go, okay, well, I'll start with the first one, we'll go from there. Just relative to item 1, simply put, I move that the planning commission recommend that it be denied.
Okay, so item 1, Dudley and Associates requested general plan amendment from residential to commercial to accommodate an office building located at approximately 1009 West 2000 North in the residential conservation zone. Mr. Anderson's motion is to recommend denial to municipal council.
Correct.
Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Wyndon. Okay, all those on item 1 in favor of forwarding a recommendation of denial to municipal council for land use change?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so item 1, we will forward a recommendation for denial to municipal council, and that was unanimous. Do we have a motion or discussion on the zone change for item 2? Ms.
I
Wyndham?
move that we recommend a motion to deny to the municipal council, item number 2. Dudley and Associates requests a zone change from residential conservation to general commercial for property located at approximately 1009 West, 2000 North, Carterville neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Wyndham. Do we have a second for Ms. Wyndham's motion? Seconded by Mr. Knudsen. All right, all those in favor of forwarding a recommendation for denial of item 2 to municipal council as so stated?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will forward a recommendation of denial on item 2 to council, and that was unanimous. And then that leaves item 3, which is project or concept plan approval. Do we have discussion or a motion on item 3? Ms. Wyndham?
I can make a motion. I move that we deny item number 3. Dudley and Associates requests concept plan approval for an office building in a proposed general commercial zone located at approximately 1009 West, 2000 North, Carterville neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Wyndham. Do we have a second to Ms. Wyndham's? Seconded by Ms. Urquiaga. All those in favor of denying item 3 as so stated?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, so that was unanimous, so item 3 is also denied. And that concludes our hearing for the evening. Do we have a motion?
I move that we dismiss.
Motion and seconded to dismiss. Thank you.